Thank you very much. It's a great honor to come here, and I very much appreciated the first speech, which was about the necessity to overcome barriers to innovation. And I think in a sense, my speech today is that even innovation system scholars should engage in innovation, in renewing our research agenda. And one way to think about that is to relate what we are doing to what colleagues are doing in some nearby fields which are relevant but still quite separate from where we work. You can say in a sense that the basic message here is that even innovation scholars should try to innovate. This presentation is based upon a paper. It's co-authored with Roman Jurowetzki. Could you stand up? Because it's very important. There will be some scientometrics. There will be some scientometrics in this paper, and if you want to ask questions about that, I propose that you ask him, not me, because he's really the expert on that. Rasmus is not here, but he has the background in doing research on global value chains, so we combine forces. When I should make a keynote, I could have taken the easy road and talked about one of my favorite topics. I have about 100 versions of lectures on innovation systems. I could take one of those. Or I could have spoken about the learning economy or something like that. But instead, I tried to make life difficult for myself, and I succeeded. So I decided to go into some new territory. And there is a printed version of this talk in the proceedings, but this is the very, very early drop. There is a much more developed one that Roman has in his computer now. Perhaps we can give you access to that. So please do not cite or quote the version which is in the paper. I'm not very satisfied with that. One background for doing this is, of course, that when we established Globalics, it was around 2001, the idea was to bring together scholars from two different fields, innovation studies and development studies. And our assumption is that to have long-term success in this, we need to consciously stimulate the interchange and cross-fertilization between scholars from those two different traditions, which have been rather separate. In this paper, we take a more specific approach. We look at two fields of knowledge. One relates to innovation systems and development, and the other one to global value chains and development. I would like to refer here to the grandfather of economics, Adam Smith. He has a very interesting formulation on the first pages in the introduction to the Wealth of Nations, where he discusses what's happening in terms of innovation based on experience and innovation based on science. And here he also specifies that the growing division of labor is not only something taking place in the economy, it also takes place in science. And he says that in the progress of society, philosophy or speculation becomes, like every other employment, subdivided into a great number of different branches, each of which affords occupation to to a peculiar tribe or class of philosophers. I have marked with bold tribe because actually, as we are going to see, you tend to establish a kind of tribe-like closeness. You tend to become grouped in different groups, and you do not have much interchange between the two. A tribe does not easily communicate and exchange ideas with another tribe. Specialization creates barriers. It might be very efficient in some respects, but it also creates barriers, and in order to further develop and innovate, it might be very useful to see how you can overcome these barriers. New ideas come from new combinations. New ideas come from combining different perspectives. This is our starting point. So what I'm going to do here, I'm going to characterize the two fields briefly. After that, I'm going to say a few words about the method, because again, we are going to make, I don't know if it's a new combination, but I think it's a useful combination to combine scientometrics with a more qualitative hermeneutical reading of the literature. Then I will present the results from the scientometric analysis, the results from the qualitative analysis, and then I move to conclusions and next steps. This is what I'm trying to do here with you. The first glance, if you look at these two areas, they are quite different. The innovation studies was very much initiated by economists, but they actually, many of them, including myself, did everything to bring in a social dimension. The role of trust, the role of dominance, and things like that. Predominantly, the innovation system, at least from the very beginning, operated at the national level, and the idea was, in a sense, to give advice to policymakers and to major actors in the national system on how to design policies and institutions. The focus is very much about interactive learning, and at least in most of the literature, interactive learning is something where you do not specify power relationship. You more refer to trust and equal relationships. I want to show this is not all true. In my early work, I actually did it slightly different. Global value chains was initiated by sociologists, but they increasingly brought in elements from economic theory. They started by bringing in elements from competition theory, and gradually a lot of references to what we call transaction cost theory. It actually, when it started, had explicitly the idea to overcome the national perspective, and also, in a sense, to overcome a tendency to overestimating the role of the state. The idea was more to see how, within the private sector, you could have upgrading taking place through integration in global value chain. Also, it has, at least from the very beginning, a very strong emphasis on the power dimension. Now, this power dimension is strongly related to what you call governance and the transaction cost analysis. I'm going to come back to that. So, at first glance, origin is different, and on some critical points, they point in opposite direction. But then, of course, you can say the objectives of the analysis are about the same. In both cases, the focus is how can you develop ideas for promoting development in less developed economies. But the mechanism to do so is different. You can say innovation system approach is quite a lot about building absorptive capacity in a broad sense. absorptive capacity, not only at the level of the single firm, but also at the level of regions and national systems. Global value chains is about upgrading firms through firms linking up with foreign new firms. So the objectives are about the same, the mechanisms are different. And each approach, at least if you take the extreme versions of them, have some obvious limitations. If you look at the NSI analysis, it's quite obvious. And this is, I can say in a sense, I'm going to talk about the need to combine these two perspectives. But of course, every intelligent manager, every intelligent policy maker is already doing it. It's only in the academic world where we have a tribal, quite clear distinction, but if you look at people in practice, they already do combine these two things. But if you look at to design intelligent institutions and policies at a national level, of course it requires an insight in the openness of the innovation system. And managing the openness includes understanding the dependence on foreign multinational firms, and this is the major challenge for national government. If you take the global value chain, to understand how and to what degree a specific firms or clusters integration in a global value chain will contribute to what is called upgrading and to economic development, it's of course important to understand the national innovation system, the regional cluster system, etc., as context for this process. This is not the first time somebody talks or people try to, scholars try to look at the relationship between two. There's a very important paper by Pietro Belli and Rabalotti from 2010, and they start from global value chain analysis, and they argue for including local, regional, and national institutions much more centrally in the analysis of value chain. And Guido Ernst and Lin Soo Kim, 2002, they start more from the innovation system perspective and point to the need to take into account the role of openness, the role of global networks in relation to innovation strategies. Finally, there is an interesting paper by Nelson and Malerba, which is about catching up and sectoral system, and in a way they also combine these two perspectives, mainly from a kind of innovation system. We are going to combine two different approaches. One is to use Scientometrics to map the two fields and to locate the core literature in each of the two fields. And the idea with this method is that we can reveal the internal structure of each field. We can see where they overlap, and we can see if there are any couplings between the two perspectives. But of course, Scientometrics can describe the structure, but it cannot really in itself explain the evolution of the fields, and it cannot really explain why they remain so separately as we are going to show that they actually are. And in order to understand that, we need actually to read the literature, and we need to follow its evolution over time, and we even are going to go back to look at the origins of the ideas in each field. And by doing so, we can both understand better why they remain disparate, why they remain separate, but we can also get a better understanding how we can combine them. So, the ultimate aim of this is to see what is the potential for developing what I call a new combination. Is it possible, by looking at these two fields, to develop a new research agenda for globalism. This is the ultimate objective of this exercise. The method and data for the scientometric analysis here, Roman should come up. I will try to see if I understand what he has been doing. He has been using Web of Science data, and they cover papers going back to around 1990. He has gone in there and looked on some keywords relating to, one is innovation system and different variations of development. Search word is developed. He looked also on global value chain and GVC, and we find more than 1,000 in the first category and about 490. We found 490 in the other. The first step was to map these fields and to look for subfields within each field. I'm going to show you some examples where this method actually shows things which are not obvious. I, for instance, realized that there are subgroups working in the innovation system tradition with whom we have had rather, some of us at least, have had very little awareness or interaction. The field is defined as having a common knowledge base as reflected in sharing of references. The second step is to see how the two main fields relate to each other. And this is done in two steps. First, there is an analysis of semantic similarity between the abstracts. So you can see which are the papers which refer to the same topics, the same terminology, etc. in the two areas. And then we go back and look at those papers that do overlap in this sense, and we look at what are the shared references for these papers. And as we are going to see, the major result is that it's surprisingly little. So here we go. This is first, you can see the period here. The yellow one is innovation system literature, and it takes off in the middle of the 90s, while the global value chain literature takes off 2002, 2003, about 5 years later. But they are both, as you can see, rather new fields and rapidly growing fields. Both. You can say there's a tendency to, of course, catching up here the last couple of years for the global value chain. This is how the frequency of papers per year which we have registered by this method. If you look at the most cited journals, there is overlap in terms of journals to some degree, but you can say that the innovation system, there you see research policy at the top is very strongly dominating as the place where you publish if you write on innovation systems. If you look at the global value chain literature, it's again a very clear domination of the journal World Development. So in a sense, it demonstrates that that the global value chain are people starting and working very much in the field of development studies. And the second one, which is frequently used, number 2, here is review of international political economy. So you can say there is a tendency, but then you will find that there is also overlap, and one of the overlaps is, important overlaps, relates to regional studies journals. So this is the pattern of how these different communities publish their papers. If you look at the top cited publications, my own, the book I edited in 92, Nelson's book from 93, Freeman 87, and Michael Porter 1990 are the 4 most cited in the literature on innovation systems. If you go to the most cited publications in the global value chain literature is Gerefi, Humphrey and Sturgeon from 2005, Humphrey and Schnitz 2002, and Gerefi 1999, but you will also find Gerefi Kortengerich from 94, which was in a sense the beginning of this to some degree. And I'm going to come back to the first couple of publications. It's interesting to note that both these are on the governance of global value chain. It's a topic I'm going to talk about. This is the clustering where we try to develop where we try to divide each field into subclusters. And we find governance is the key word for quite a number of the publications. As I mentioned, the 2 first most referred papers also are about, and then we have industrial clusters and global value chain and innovation, and finally we have a smaller cluster on trade. So I will just say a few words about the 2 main subclusters here. The governance perspective, the main journal is Review of International Political Economy. Many of the publications come from the UK, United States, China, and Denmark. Main reference are, the most important reference is the 2005 paper by Gerefi, Humphrey, Sturgeon, Governance of Global Value Chains. And there is no obvious overlap with the innovation system literature. This is slightly different for the regional perspective. Here we find main journals, research policy, world development, and regional studies. And again, China, United States, but also Italy and Spain are strongly represented. Here it's more Humphrey and Schmitz. And Humphrey and Schmitz, they come from IDS in Sussex. Gerefi is from the United States. And this paper is how does insertion in global value chains affect upgrade in industrial clusters. It's also a paper about governance. And it overlaps with the innovation system in different ways, the journals, some of the authors, and some of the clusters. We are going to find that the rather limited overlap is related to either clusters or regional innovation system and how these two work together. Here we get the clustering of the innovation system. We get a more, again, more geographical part here, which is actually quite big. The role of distance. We have another big one, which is on management. It's actually management and policy. And then we have a small cluster here, which is more on science-based or science focus on innovation system. Here is also triple helix. And here we have technological innovation systems, Buchholz and other people, and it's quite separate to some degree. It's very much based on the idea of innovation system as having specific functions. And it's much more focused on how you develop, how new technologies emerge, and how policies can stimulate the emergence of new technologies. And this one is not big, but it's quite clear group working on agriculture and development and innovation systems. It has very little actually relation to the other areas. So this is just to say, in this case, for me, the Scientometrics actually showed stuff that I could not see before we did it, and I found it quite interesting. You find three main subclusters: innovation and geography, the biggest one. Main journals: European planning studies, regional studies. The major reference is to a paper on clusters and knowledge, local bus, global pipelines by economic geographers. Countries are UK, United States, Germany, Netherlands. It has some overlap with these, to some degree on the journal level, and also contextual in terms of terminology, the classical literature. If we look at the management of innovation policy, research policy, you have, again, the main references, Nelson, Lundvall, Freeman, technological systems. One field, special field which has taken up this is the work on sustainable technologies, more environmental issues and stuff like that. And the most important reference is a new approach for studying functions of innovation systems, but it's very much and it goes, normally you find a lot of it at the technological university, while you find management of innovation in business schools, and you find innovation in geography, of course in regional studies, technological systems, functional approach, drives especially at technical universities. So the next step was to, and again, Roman might be able to explain this to you if necessary. He's doing latent semantic indexing. It's a special technique to measure location of papers in a knowledge space based upon word coherence in abstract. And what you do is that you identify latent topics, you make a projection of all the abstracts into the generated vector space, and you calculate or pairwise cosines between abstracts, and thereby you create the network of wallpapers both from the IS and BBC, and you see which of those papers coming from the two areas are close to each other in terms of the compound. And it's based on the Louvain algorithm by Blondel, etc. from 2008. And this is how it looks. Here you get all the global value chain papers to the right in green, and you get the innovation system in red, and you will find that there are some of these papers located here, and those are the ones we're going to look at slightly a little more closely in order to see what characterize them in terms of the references that they use. And these are the most important references that they use. And I have pointed in red here because these are papers which are not at the core of the two areas necessarily, but they are typically in regional studies. It's Humphrey and Smith themselves we tried about in regional studies. That paper from 2002 is Peter Mascal and others about pipelines and digital consumption. It's Boschman from Netherlands. Again, Peter Mascal, Michael Walker, you can also say Andre Torre and from Martin. So you can say those who have crossed these two fields so far is mainly people from economic geography and regional studies. That's one of our conclusions from the Scientometric. Very little of that. That's the first. Very little of that. Very much tribe. Very much one tribe and another tribe, not talking very much with each other. But there are a few examples of communication, and this is related to industrial agglomerations, either in the global value chain area is more on industrial clusters, and in innovation systems is more on regional and sectoral innovations. So that was the Scientometric. I'm going to be very brief. I don't know, Mr. Chairman, how am I doing in terms of time?
10 minutes more.
10 minutes?
Yes.
Okay, I'll try to do it. Having shown that if you look at the literature, you will find some, actually reading, you will find some stuff which you could not possibly find just by the Scientometrics. And one is that there tends to be a US-Europe divide in both camps, not following exactly but related borderlands. And there is some indication that it might be easier to merge the ideas on the European side than on the US side. The second is that the discussion of governance is quite important in global value chains, but it also has something to do with the origin of innovation systems, including my own work. And in order to show that, I'm going to go back to the origins. I will say something about what lessons can be learned, and then at the end I will talk about how to work on what I call bias in the two here. Schmitz, Humphrey, and Rabeloff, they are all from Europe. They study clusters in developing countries with inspiration from the Italian industrial district literature. Here, trust and collective action, including support from public policy, are seen as contributing to what they call collective efficiency. This is very fundamental for the idea of industrial district as it comes from India. If we look at the US scholars, they are quite skeptical both to the idea of collective efficiency and to the idea of national policy intervention. They do not have much belief in the capacity of governments to lead. So we found a split there. I have argued in other papers that we have a distinction in the innovation system literature between a more broad approach, which corresponds to what I've done myself and Chris Freeman, and also all these regional innovation people on the one hand, and a more narrow approach, which is more inspired by US scholars. The first one looks at innovation as rooted not only in the science system, but also as rooted in the production system, while the US version is more narrow and looks more on how the innovation system is rooted in the science system. So we find in both literature interesting divide between scholars from the US. If you look at global value chain literature, as I mentioned, the biggest cluster is about governance, and it's actually, as I said, inspired by economics. Most of the analysis is done by sociologists, but they have taken in the ideas of transaction costs from Williamson and others and tried to transform it in order to understand governance. So you can see this is quite fundamental for the evolution of global governance literature. Gerefi, 1994, for here, governance is very simple. It's basically that you have global value chains which are dominated either from the production side by multinational firms with a very strong technological capability, or they are dominated from the demand side. And then it's a question of big multinational located in the United States with very strong market control and branding. We just heard from the former speaker the growing importance of market control and branding. And this comes out quite strongly in this analysis. Humphrey and Schlitz, they actually did research on clusters for a long time. I mentioned that. And they entered this global value chain literature full scale only in that paper 2002. And here they introduced transaction cost analysis, and they argue that the dominant form in a value chain will reflect the capability of the supplier, the complexity of the product, and the need for a quick response. 2005, we get even more complex idea of governance. Here, Gerefi, Humphrey, and Sturgeon developed this more, and they introduced modularization as a process that reduces complexity and transaction costs. And there's another change here. While they are looking for one dominant form of governance for the whole value chain, which is, by the way, different from the way Williamson used it, here you look at the governance related to specific interfaces, transactions. You have an internal debate in the global value chain literature where some scholars are quite critical to this economics term of the governance discussion. They ask the question, do we really learn something new as compared to the original one by moving into those more complex governance? But it's an interesting internal debate in the literature on global value chain. Value chain analysis, if you go back to the very beginning, it has roots in Wallerstein's world system idea, a kind of Marxist understanding of globalization, not as something new, but something which was there already in the 16th century. And they introduced the idea of global commodity chains already in 1978. But this is, but there's also a paper by Gerefi in 1978 where he makes a case study of pharmaceutical industry in Mexico, which I think is quite important to read in order to understand what happens later in the global value chain literature. The innovation system analysis, as pointed out by Chris Freeman, it has roots in Friedrich Litz's idea of national system of production. And you can say, hereby you indicate in a sense that globalization might be seen as a problem in relation to But it also had roots in a booklet that I wrote in 1985 on user-producer interaction and product innovation. I'm going to say a few words about this. So Gerefi 78. It's a case study of pharmaceuticals in Mexico. It demonstrates how a very promising national industry was destroyed by a combination of US intervention, both government intervention from the big multinationals and the weak government in Mexico. And here there is a policy implication that there would have been need for protection and intervention. You can say that gradually this perspective has changed and focus moves more and more in this global value chain towards the positive opportunities for upgrading offered by entrance in global value chain. And the argument here is that since governments are weak, international organizations do not allow protection, the only option is for countries in less developed countries to enter global value chain. I think I will, in order not to, I'm going to make sure that the PowerPoints are accessible, so you can look at the ones I just passed by. And I would like to refer here to a paper by Luc Sutter. It's in a book which was edited by Jan Fagerberg, who is sitting there, and others. And what he's warning against is that he can see a bias. He can see a tendency among innovation scholars to say innovation is always good. And actually he refers to a slogan for Guinness, you know, the beer. They have this slogan that says that Guinness is good for you. And to some degree it might be right, but it depends on how much and under what circumstances. And the same is here. And I think there might be a bias in an innovation system that innovation is good for you. And I think in the later, most recent version of global value chains, I can see a tendency to say globalization is good for you. And I think that to bring these two together might be a way, and going back to the origins, which were more critical in both cases, would be a way to go against this. So this is my last slide. So what I think is that the best way to move towards some integration is to organize empirical research. Of course, connected with developing of new theoretical ideas, but I think there's an opportunity to establish a global giga project. It's Rasmus Lema's idea to refer to it like that, a really big one, to study the consequences of the integration, but also the exclusion of firms and clusters located in regional, sectoral, and national innovations. Such a project would bring together scholars from all the regional leagues, including the newly founded Euroleagues, and scholars with roots in innovation systems, as well as scholars rooted in value chain. And of course, we should use many methods aiming at linking micro to meso and meso to macro level, and the other way around. That might give a central role to those who have been doing analysis in regional studies, since we have shown that those are the in these two tracks. Thank you very much.